I swear that I wasn't intending to peek. The usually closed window was open, and the curtains were swinging in the breeze in an attractive way. I was staring into the deep window when I noticed her. A stunningly beautiful woman, unlike anything I had ever seen. I was unable to turn away. I was freezing solid. I'm Scott Thompson, a 32-year-old salesperson. I am employed in the sales division of a real estate company. It is more proper, in my opinion, to state that I was once in sales. I'm not bragging, but I was a great salesperson. I've received multiple awards from the corporate headquarters for being the best seller. I guess I got comfortable, thinking I would keep going in the direction of success. My unplanned plunge into the abyss occurred a month ago. My coworker unexpectedly became sick in the morning, so she requested me to cover for her for an afternoon property viewing appointment. My colleague Bob Miller was the one who went down. Bob was known for his ostentatious appearance, and to be honest, I didn't like him. For some reason, he liked to pick on me. However, Bob politely requested a favor from me, so I felt compelled to agree. A lady in her late 40s was the property showing's client. Everyone was booked, so I wanted to send a female colleague to go with her. The woman asked to visit a condo that had just been built in a high rise. It was a substantial deal, close to $2 million in value. She was Bob's client, so I had to be very cautious when assisting her. Bob complaining that I was the reason we couldn't close the business was the last thing I wanted. I took great care to show her around every room. She gave off the impression that she was not paying attention to what I was saying. I was about to give up on this, but then she froze me in place by wrapping her arms over my neck. The woman smiled seductively at me. It was a terrible circumstance. Would you like to play a little? My back tingled as she requested. I was immobile as her gentle body stroked against mine. Even though I wanted to take her out cold, she was a client. As they were attempting to come to a peaceful conclusion, the door unexpectedly opened. My supervisor, the department manager, was the one who barged in. Anger was radiating from his face. He pushed the woman away from me. He angrily exclaimed at me, "Scott, what the hell are you doing with my wife?" I was shocked as I stood there. The woman was apparently the manager's spouse. Rumors had it that they were splitting up. The wife who'd wooed me laughed and said, "Busted." I was summoned to the director's office a few hours later. I had been reported by the manager for acting indecently and attempting to seduce a client. I wanted to fix a few things in his report, but there was no room for justifications in this environment. The director was staring at me like I was garbage, and the manager, who was still flushed, was furious. The manager reportedly said that I had used similar dishonest tactics to get all of my prior contracts. I was thus moved to a branch office located in a small rural town. In a sense, I was demoted. Bob was smiling smugly as I returned to my desk to get the reassignment notification. It was too late when I realized then that I had been set up. Packing up my personal stuff in silence, I walked out of the main office. I feel like I'm going to die from being so inactive since I was transferred to the branch office in a tiny town. Like a little rural village, the town where I was sent is close to the sea, and there isn't much job. The population has increased as fewer people have relocated to the city. I recall that the question of whether to close this branch had come up at a prior headquarters meeting. "Scott, isn't it boring? It's simply so calm here," they remarked. The branch was empty of patrons and had nowhere to do business. I was fiddling with the required paperwork every day. The only benefit of moving to this branch was the increased size of my living area. Instead of having me use a little city condo, they had me utilize a family-sized apartment. I like having room to spread out, even though it might have just been large for the purpose of being large. I brought up the pet policy with the branch manager the following day. When I got to work, there was a mewing box of kittens on my desk. I opted to keep them even though I had a suspicion about who might be at fault and because I found it to be a fun diversion. I was surprised to find a cat bed, kitten food, and canned goods on my desk the following morning. I couldn't resist grinning. My coworkers were slyly observing me. I started to feel that always maintaining a grim expression was pointless. I eventually grew accustomed to the branch's relaxed vibe. In this town, my coworkers were amiable. It was a Sunday that day. I was off, but the branch was open. I've been unable to smoke inside since I started raising cats. I set out a spot to smoke on the balcony. I leaned against the balcony railing and started a cigarette, as usual. Through the roofs, I could see the glittering sea. I had to avert my eyes since it was so bright. There was a 2-story building next to my apartment. The window of the typically shuttered corner room was open, the curtain billowing in the breeze. It dawned on me that this was my first weekend here in this town. The individual in the corner room must have had the day off as well. It seemed impolite to fixate too much. I was going to look back toward the water when I noticed something at the window of the corner room. Behind the billowing curtain, a young woman was in the middle of changing. It was difficult to look away, even though I knew I shouldn't. I let out an ouch as I dropped the ash from my cigarette onto the back of my hand. She gave me a look. She gave me a crazy-looking glance the instant our eyes locked. That surprised me, because the window was closed very tightly. She didn't scream at all, which is not what I would have expected. Instead, she just glared at me. Suddenly, I wanted to laugh. I broke out into laughter without even trying. Once more, the window flew open. She screamed at me, "Don't laugh, just you wait and see," and the window was closed again right away. Then footsteps reverberated, coming down the apartment's exterior stairs. Really? Wait? Will she be arriving here? From the balcony, I ran for the door. I heard the lift start to ding. I could hear footsteps approaching through the door. I braced myself and bided my time till the doorbell rang. The footsteps came to an end. She cried out, "Come out." I froze for a second as I resignedly opened the front door. By mistake, she had pressed the doorbell of the adjacent room. We exchanged glances and both let out a "ah." The next instant, a curvaceous woman who lived next door answered the door and said, "Yes, yes." Abruptly, the Chihuahua sprang out and gave her a fierce bark. She apologized profusely for entering the wrong room by mistake, but the Chihuahua kept barking at her until she brought herself back to reality. Instinctively, I too lowered my head and apologized. After getting the Chihuahua, the woman shut the door. Avoid repeating that error. It's annoying. I muttered to her as she stood motionless in the unexpectedly silent hallway. She gave me a sneer, appearing relieved that the disturbance had subsided. And with that, she strode right into my room. She moved to the middle of the space, pivoted, and gave me a stern look. It was visible, wasn't it? "My thing," she murmured. That slightly aggravated me. It resembled a mishap. I observed nothing. "What topic are you discussing?" I attempted to counter that I was just lucky to happen to see. What were you able to witness?" This, she murmured, tugging at her t-shirt collar to expose her chest. There was a peek of her blue panties. "Hey, give it up. It is manifesting." I quickly backed away from her, not wanting to make things worse. She was still showing off her chest and accusing me like she was after me. It was in sight, as you and I both observed. I apologize, but I assure you that it wasn't my aim. She slapped my cheek before I could say anything else. She was quite intense the first time I saw her. "Hey Scott, how about we go get lunch?" "It's my treat," the branch manager suggested the following day at lunchtime. I nodded and slapped my smacked face with a cooling pad my boss had given me. He took me to a little cafe that was close to the shore. I had previously walked past it, but never gone inside. The branch manager, who appeared to be erratic, went to the counter and ordered the standard lunch for 2. Yes, 2 lunches. "Please choose a place to sit." It was the same woman who had hit me the day before who answered from behind the counter. When she noticed me standing next to the branch manager, her eyes widened even further. I awkwardly held up my hand to meet you. Hi. What are you saying, you peeper? I recoiled from a barrage of insults. Oh, you peeped, the branch manager remarked nonchalantly, before laughing. I was left with nothing to stand on, and could only retreat. Eventually, I sat at the counter next to my boss and endured her scowls as we ate lunch. She described what had occurred yesterday when the branch manager inquired as to whether anything had transpired. I listened to their chat in silence, not wanting to add to the already awkward situation. She brought up my shortcomings to the branch manager. I was concerned about his reaction, but he seemed to be amused by the whole event. He is a promiscuous man. He doesn't need to urinate. The remarks made by the branch manager astonished me. She asked excitedly, "What do you mean?" The branch manager informed her of my transfer's reason and broke out in laughter. With a giggle, she exclaimed, seriously. It astonished me how she responded. I was afraid she would think the worst of me and hate me, but instead she responded, "You had some bad luck, huh?" with a giggle. The door to the cafe opened while we were chattering eagerly at the counter, and men who were obviously not locals stepped in. Her eyebrows furrowed upon seeing them. Those men were speaking with the management. It didn't appear like they were there for the coffee. After receiving certain documents, the manager promptly mailed them off. The manager tossed the papers in the garbage. Hey, what was that all about? I made the decision to inquire. She answered that they've only recently begun to change. They appear to be real estate brokers who have been actively purchasing homes in this neighborhood. Obviously, they are unrelated to our business. It's true that the company she cited is not well known in the sector. She sighed and added, "It looks like they're asking if we're willing to sell this place too." Despite its negative image, land speculation is a legitimate aspect of the real estate industry. If deals are made with mutual consent and at a reasonable price, then nothing is wrong with it. Could you move somewhere else if you could sell for a high price? I recommended. Even around midday, we were the only customers here, so it felt a little empty as a business. I suggested moving and looking for a more lucrative place, but she became very angry and arched her eyebrows. Avoid making rash remarks if you don't recognize the importance of this community, she snapped. If you identify as a local real estate agent, learn more about this community before vanishing into the rear room. She is incredibly enthusiastic about our local community, so I apologize for that. We call her Kathy. Please try not to take it too personally. Continue spending time with us, he said as he stealthily poured us more coffee. I started a new habit after that day. I made the decision to take a leisurely stroll out the neighborhood after work rather than heading straight home. Kathy had sparked something with her remarks about local love. Her remarks gave me motivation, even though I had been depressed since my promotion. Walking gave me the opportunity to learn a lot of new things. Despite the claim that there weren't many young people, I observed that there were a lot of recent youthful arrivals, seemingly drawn to the ocean. The majority of them appeared to have moved here. I had never seen the morning sea, and I'm not a morning person. A young man who had moved from the city and operated a pub invited me to the beach before work. I was unaware of the existence of a nearby beach at the time. There were surfers waiting for the waves just as the sun was going to rise. It startled me to see people surfing so early in the morning because I had never surfed. I walked down to the sandy beach to witness the scene, heart racing. I saw that there were restrictions while I watched them. One person could only ride a wave at a time. They were making way for one another as if there were some sort of hierarchy. It was unexpected. It wasn't as tough as I had thought it would be. "What are you doing?" When I turned to face the voice, I saw that it was Kathy. She held flippers and a huge bodyboard in her hands. "Happy morning." "What is that?" I asked, gesturing to the big bodyboard. Kathy knelt down next to me and placed her flippers in the sand. She then displayed the sizable bodyboard to me. It was attached with some form of rope, unlike a standard bodyboard. What seemed like a wristband was at the end of the rope. "It's a bodyboard." "Have you never seen one before?" she inquired. She was wearing a 3/4 length, short-sleeved sweatsuit. She was most likely going to surf. I discovered that bodyboarding and surfing are two distinct sports. Laying your upper body on the board allowed you to ride the waves. Fins, or flippers, are worn on the feet to aid with underwater navigation. With everything being so new, I had a lot of questions. As she performed her warm-up stretches, she methodically went over everything. I discovered that there are certain times when the waves emerge and go, and that the waves are best in the morning. "Scott, why not get it a shot? Living so close to the sea is a waste if you don't." As she put on her fins and got to her feet, she joked, "Make the most of your move." She was set to leave after attaching the leash, which is a chain that holds the board to her wrist, to it. She peered back at me as she walked backward into the water while wearing fins. She had a penguin-like appearance. When our gazes locked, she shot me a huge happy wave. She turned around and began to walk toward the horizon over the waves as soon as the water reached her waist. She seemed skilled at what she was doing. However, I was afraid she may topple over on a strong wave. She picked up some speed and slid her board under the wave. I discovered later that this maneuver is known as a dolphin dive. Before she got to the waiting area where the best waves come in, she passed a couple waves. She waved at me as she sat on her board. She would pick up pace and surf the wave when it came. She slid diagonally down the big waves and looked like she was flying. She was satisfied with her appearance when she came ashore after spending nearly an hour in the sea. It was the other surfers heading back to shore. To my amazement, every one of them said hello as they went past. Even though it was a tiny gesture, it warmed my heart. Under their wetsuits, some of them displayed tattoos. Everyone seemed extremely amiable, in spite of the differences. It was very almost unexpected. Kathy had removed her wetsuit's upper portion. I was a little startled by her bright blue bikini, but then I realized something and had to say it aloud. "Oh, you weren't not wearing a swimsuit at the time." It turned out that it wasn't underwear. She was wearing her bikini, not the underwear I thought I saw her in. Why she didn't mind that I saw it makes sense. Kathy laughed and snorted. Though I was surprisingly revived, I also felt a little adrift. Looking at the sparkling water, I squinted and murmured, "This is a nice town." She smiled warmly and held out her hand to greet me. "Welcome." I shook her hand. It was still a little chilly from the water. I began getting up early to go to the beach after that day. Unfortunately, I am not a swimmer, therefore I was unable to attempt surfing. Even though I knew I would float if I wore a wetsuit, I still found the thought of diving into the water unsettling. I'd also started having lunch every day at the cafe where Kathy works. I started to know the businesses in the area and started spending more time with the young people who had recently relocated here. I started to hear more and more stories about the land sharks as I settled there. They appeared to be actively promoting their cause. Something large seemed to be moving, and it didn't feel quite right. Then one day my suspicions were confirmed. I watched a black, high-end automobile drive by on my way to work. Through the window, I glimpsed a face I recognized. Bob, the person who had framed me, was there. I was unaware that Bob was leaving his position. He's up to no good with another real estate company, taking a different approach. If he's moving covertly, there must be some dubious activity involved. As soon as I arrived at work, I called a friend who worked at the main office. My acquaintance says that Bob is presumably off for the annual holiday today. His lifestyle has become substantially more lavish, and he has been missing a lot of work lately. I inquired about his sales results. Bob appears to be leading in sales at the moment while I'm away, but my buddies feel that there's a problem with his sales. He thinks Bob might be dealing with risky grooves. Perhaps that's where his ostentatious lifestyle originated. I went to the regular cafe during lunch, hoping to see Kathy. I gasped as soon as I walked into the cafe. The wife of the department manager, the source of my mental agony, was sitting nicely at the coffee counter, sipping her coffee. She smiled softly at me, seeing that I was halted at the door. She motioned to me to take a seat beside her with a quiet flick of her well-groomed finger. I grudgingly took a seat beside her. "What brings you here? You were to blame for that." Speaking it out loud released a wave of long-forgotten rage. Just as I was going to speak something, she put a finger to my lips and said, "Be quiet." I apologize for the time I missed due to the exchange terms. It wasn't my intention to harm your career. My growing rage was calmed by her pitying smile. I find it troubling that I can't seem to despise this woman for some reason. Without being able to respond, I glanced down, and she began to tell me the whole truth. It appears that Bob got in touch with her when she was in dire need of divorce. To frame me, he offered her money. She consented because she would need the money in her post-divorce existence. Bob had been severely disparaging me, claiming that I would be a burden on his future endeavors. Why are you telling me all this now? Because there has been no movement of funds. Thus, the agreement is null and void, correct? It was logical. She seemed to be looking into Bob out of malice, too. In front of me, she unfolded his investigative report. I skimmed the report quickly. Bob seemed to be associated with some really sketchy characters. He appeared to be helping them acquire properties for real estate. I came to understand that the person looking through all of the local real estate was going to start a real estate brokerage. I couldn't help but be impressed by the plan's scope. But as much as I liked Bob's ideas, I couldn't accept that these hazardous parties would control this area. "How much would you pay for this?" She cocked her head to look directly into my face. A small amount of glitter glistened on her beautiful eyelashes. I didn't know how much to provide. "How much do you think?" With timidity, I inquired. "How about you treat me to a cup of coffee?" She smiled in response. She said as much, holding up her empty coffee cup in front of my shocked eyes. I spent the evening by myself in the office, going over the Bob investigation report that she had given me. I spent the night writing and emailing the headquarters with my report. By tomorrow morning, the headquarters would undoubtedly be in disarray. Relationships with risky individuals would be extremely detrimental to the company's image. I got a call from headquarters as anticipated. I was requested to attend to the headquarters the following day. After a long time, I found myself staring at the headquarters building. I was expecting to feel more sentimental, but I didn't. I could only think that this place seemed to have a smaller sky. Someone hurried over to me as soon as I entered the premises with my employee ID. My transfer was arranged by the department manager. "What are you doing here?" the department boss asked, grabbing me by the collar. Even though I've been moved to a branch office, I work for this corporation. I'm at headquarters for business. The manager and I exchanged a brief scowl in the lobby. We were interrupted by the president's secretary. I shrugged off the department manager and was told to report straight to the president's office. It was instructed that the department manager follow along as well. I went inside the president's office, and there was Bob, looking pale. The department manager was confused and uncomfortable. I was told by the president, "I read your report." My report was on the desk, along with a ton of other papers and pictures. "They have to look into this yesterday." These were probably evidence of Bob's wrongdoing. When the manager saw the pictures of Bob doing business meetings with dubious people, she became pale. The misbehavior of a subordinate cast doubt on the supervision of his superior. I was hoping that as a result of our shared responsibility, we would both be expelled. Bob was dismissed, and the department manager was demoted, according to the president's decision. Later on, I found out that most of Bob's sales were agreements with dubious partners. Our internal policies should allow us to cancel the purchase contracts, but it will be challenging to negotiate each one separately. All I can hope is that everyone at the headquarters will band together and put in a lot of effort. Bob paled as he exited the room after receiving his notice of termination. I heard the president say, "Come back to headquarters." He urged me to be the best salesman I was ever. That's what I had first thought would happen, but I was uncomfortable with it. I said nothing, unable to respond right away. The president appeared to be anticipating my response. The enormous window behind the president caught my attention. The day was bright and the light was streaming in. Still, it was long beyond work hours, and the sun had set when I got back to the branch office. Although I assumed that by now everyone would have gone home, the office windows were well lit. People were working unusually long hours, which astonished me. Unexpectedly, a party popper went off as I opened the door. I shouted back, shocked by the popping sound and finding myself coated in thin strips of paper. I had no idea what to say. Greetings from HQ on your return. Getting back on the fast track. My fellow branch employees, the branch manager, the president of the shopping district, and a few surfers I know were all crammed into the office. Everyone showed up when I stated you would most likely be heading back to headquarters. Donning a party hat, the branch manager exclaimed, "You're really loved." Ha! His remarks had already irritated a few people. It's taken for granted that I'm leaving this branch. I've heard you were a top salesperson once. I was completely ignorant. A twinge of sadness shot through my chest as Kathy smiled. You're not someone who should be wasting away in a place like this. You know, I turned down the offer to return to headquarters, I replied. My words put a look of confusion on everyone's faces. Observing their facial expressions, I experienced some remorse. I thought I had let them down. What? Why? Regarding your advancement, how are things going? Kathy barraged me with questions, acting as though she spoke for the entire group. I basically reiterated what I had told the president after giving it some thought. The city is overly small. I can't breathe, and there's no sea. I'd like to pick up swimming. Kathy gave me a look of incredulity and embraced me. I muttered something that was only audible to Kathy, and you wouldn't be there. Kathy did not comment, but by her tight grip on my arm, I could tell what she was thinking. I believe that my choice was perfectly appropriate. As usual, I sat on the sandy beach early the next morning and gazed out to sea. Kathy was getting ready to jump into the waves next to me. Her eyes squinted as she examined the waves. Kathy looked at me, watching her profile. Weren't you the one who wanted to learn to swim? She didn't appear happy that I wasn't accompanying her inside. I wanted to learn to swim, but I didn't even have a swimsuit. Kathy laughed when I told her I had to get the gear first. Just swim in your shorts. I've been thinking, do you want to get married? At my words, Kathy froze. She has always been full of surprises, even since we first met. However, I was successful in my goal to surprise her this time. Gazing at Kathy, who was frozen, I grinned to myself. Regaining consciousness, she laughed, glanced at my smile, and clicked her tongue. I'm not marrying a non-swimmer. She averted her gaze and exclaimed. Then, in a much smaller voice, she added, If you learn to swim, I'll consider it. It was nothing new that she was teasing. When did you start liking me? A bodyboard hit me before I could finish my line. Cease presuming things about yourself. Return to headquarters. Kathy rushed toward the water when she saw me with that parting shot. She approached the edge of the lake and suddenly turned around. She must have discovered that her flippers were missing. She grabbed them from me when I held them out. She turned and gave me a huge wave as she put on the flippers at the edge of the sea. The ring better be a diamond, not a birthstone. I could even go into the sea with her fearlessly. I wish I could have told the depressed me when I was relocated from headquarters to this village and arrived. You're going to find the greatest treasure in this town. I suppose I should thank the goddess of fate for now.